Welcome to the dawn of one of the most pivotal battles in history. On the early morning of June 6, 1944, as a thick fog cloaked the coast of Normandy, a massive invasion was quietly preparing to unfold, one that would change the world forever. But behind the scenes, cutting-edge weapons and secret plans were shaping the outcome of this colossal clash. Did you know that a revolutionary British explosive, weighing just 40 pounds, was capable of tearing through 2-meter thick concrete defenses in a single blast? Or that the German defenses were built around a machine gun so deadly it fired 1,200 rounds per minute, creating a lethal crossfire along the Atlantic Wall? How about the fact that the Allies had developed modified Churchill tanks fitted with strange flying dust bins, mortars capable of punching through German bunkers from 80 yards away? And what if I told you that a young soldier, barely 20, was manning a machine gun at Omaha Beach, unaware that his entire sector would soon be transformed by a new kind of armor, one designed to crush German fortifications? All of these elements, secret weapons, innovative tactics, untested soldiers, are pieces of a puzzle that will determine who ultimately claims victory on that fateful day. The question is, how did the Allies plan to break the seemingly impregnable defenses of the Atlantic Wall? And what hidden innovations could turn the tide against the formidable German forces? In this video, we will trace every step of this extraordinary story, uncovering the ingenuity, the peril, and the unexpected secrets that brought about D-Day's chaos and triumph. Get ready to see history in a way you've never imagined, as we piece together the true story behind the largest amphibious invasion in human history. The battle begins now. On the early morning of June 6, 1944, precisely at 6 o'clock, the coast of Normandy was cloaked in a thick, rolling mist, swirling over the calm yet ominous waters of the English Channel. It was in this murky dawn that Aubrey's seasoned fighter, Wilhelm Krauss, sat silently within the confines of a concrete defensive emplacement, known by its designation as Whiter Stanza 73. Gripping the cold handles of his MG-42 machine gun, a formidable weapon often referred to as Hitler's bus because of its relentless capacity to unleash destruction, Krauss gazed out through a narrow embrasure, watching as the largest invasion fleet in human history gradually emerged from the shrouding fog. Unbeknownst to him, a revolutionary British weapon had been secretly developed to target such fortifications, capable of rendering them completely useless with a single devastating blast. This weapon was a meticulously crafted demolition charge, weighing just 40 pounds, designed to obliterate reinforced concrete defenses up to 2 meters thick, making them as fragile as cardboard against this new threat. British engineers had engineered this explosive with precision, knowing that it could neutralize even the most formidable structures, including the formidable Churchill tanks already loading into landing craft, ready to storm the beaches. The MG-42, often celebrated as a brilliant instrument of destruction, was capable of firing at a staggering rate of 1,200 rounds per minute. Its relentless fire created overlapping fields of deadly bullets with neighboring defensive positions along the Atlantic Wall, a formidable network of fortified defenses that Field Marshal Rommel and his team had spent months meticulously constructing. These positions were designed to be nearly impregnable, each equipped with machine guns, reinforced concrete bunkers, and carefully angled embrasures to minimize targeting by attackers. Yet, what Krauss did not realize was that the British 79th Armored Division had spent more than a year preparing for this assault, training with modified Churchill tanks fitted with 29mm spigot mortars, capable of hurling what they humorously called flying dust bins directly through the firing slits at a range of about 80 yards. German defensive doctrine centered heavily around the MG-42, with each 10-man squad essentially built around the weapon's firepower. These squads carried plenty of ammunition, spare barrels, and protective gear, since the gun's overheated barrels required replacement after about every 250 rounds. The gunner, protected within his fortified position, controlled the battlefield with sustained bursts of 7.92mm rounds, capable of decimating entire platoons in moments, creating a lethal corridor of fire along the shoreline. Back in March of 1944, Krauss had observed the efforts of the labor crews, mostly conscripted French workers and Italian prisoners, pouring thousands of cubic meters of concrete to reinforce this very position. The walls, roughly 3.5 meters thick on the seaward side, were designed with multiple layers of protection against naval bombardments and direct tank assaults. The embrasures, angled openings built to offer minimal targets, had been constructed with precision, ensuring that attacking forces on the beaches would be exposed to a murderous crossfire as they advanced. Northern defenses at WN-73, situated near La Hamel, had been designated as a critical stronghold. It was equipped with one of the scarce 75mm anti-tank guns, positioned for maximum coverage, and supported by several MG-42 nests nestled within reinforced Tobruk positions. Small, single-soldier concrete bunkers dotted the coastline like mushrooms, each strategically placed to cover blind spots and overlapping kill zones. These fortifications were designed to funnel invading troops into predetermined areas of fire, creating a deadly maze of obstacles that would slow and slaughter enemy forces as they attempted landings. German military planners studied the disaster of the previous August, when a failed Allied assault at Dieppe had resulted in Canadian Churchill tanks being halted on the beach, unable to breach the formidable defenses or climb the seawall. They believed that the fortified positions along the coast had been improved to such an extent that any similar attack would be suicidal. Unbeknownst to them, however, was the covert work of Lieutenant J. Denevin of the Royal Canadian Engineers, who had been diligently developing a variant of the Churchill tank capable of surviving the perilous approach to these fortified positions and delivering a decisive blow. This innovative development had been entrusted to Major General P., a key figure in the British effort to counteract the emerging German defenses. As dawn broke over the coastline, the stage was set for a colossal clash, one that would mark a turning point in the history of warfare, driven by ingenuity, preparation, and the relentless drive of armies on both sides. The Battle of Normandy was about to commence, with every soldier and every piece of equipment poised to play their part in a conflict that would determine the future of the world. In the early days of June, the Allied forces prepared for a pivotal assault on Normandy, deploying an array of specialized equipment and meticulously strategized units to confront the formidable German defenses. Among these formidable assets was the elite division known as Hobart's Funnies, a nickname affectionately bestowed upon the 79th Armored Division, commanded by Lieutenant General Percy Hobart. This division was renowned not just because of its numerical designation, but due to the peculiar and innovative nature of its armored vehicles. Distinctively designed tanks with unconventional appearances and specialized functions, crafted precisely to overcome the challenges posed by fortified German positions. By the time mid-June of 1944 arrived, the Hobart's Funnies had made significant contributions to the Allied war effort. Their engineers had developed and deployed nearly 180 assault vehicles designated as Royal Engineers Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, or simply AVRES. These extraordinary vehicles were armed with multiple hefty demolition charges, each weighing approximately 40 pounds, capable of demolishing concrete bunkers and pillboxes with a single, well-placed strike. Such firepower was aimed at transforming heavily fortified German defensive structures into ruins, clearing the way for advancing infantry and armor. On an early morning, at a location known as Wider Stannis, approximately 5 kilometers to the east of Omaha Beach, a young soldier named Heinrich Sauo, barely 20 years old, had been standing watch since before sunrise, manning his machine gun, an MG-42. Heinrich was the son of a humble farmer who had never previously fired a shot in anger, let alone in combat, until that very morning. He was positioned alongside Lieutenant Bernhard Führing in an observation post commanding the entire eastern sector of what the Allies referred to as Omaha Beach, although the actual battlefield included several sectors where British forces were also advancing from the direction of Gold Beach. The German defenders in this area belonged to the 352nd Infantry Division, which had been repositioned to the coast only a few weeks prior to D-Day. Despite their reputation as seasoned veterans, having fought fiercely on the Eastern Front, they had never encountered the specialized armor and tactics the Allies were about to unleash. These defenses included weapons and vehicles specifically designed to counteract the advantages of German fortified positions especially entrenched machine gun nests that had dominated battlefield tactics since the days of the First World War, often called the Psalm in reverence to the biblical Psalms that inspired resilience and endurance. One of the primary German weapons that cast a shadow over Allied soldiers was the MG-42 machine gun. Its chilling, high-pitched ripping sound, a noise likened to ripping canvas, had a profound psychological impact on those on the Allied side. Veterans who faced the MG-42 knew all too well how instantly paralyzing its staccato burst could be. However, the Germans operating these guns also harbored their own fears, particularly regarding the feared German tank-mounted flamethrowers and other heavy weapons they had encountered earlier on the Eastern Front. Yet nothing in their experience had prepared them for the devastating new innovations in armored warfare that lay ahead, capable of unleashing destruction in ways previously unthinkable. The MG-42's firepower, if unleashed in sustained bursts, was nothing short of terrifying. Its practical rate of fire was around 150 rounds per minute, an unsustainable rate for prolonged periods, to avoid overheating, but even then it was enough to deliver an overwhelming volume of fire. To put it into perspective, a single MG-42 could theoretically project 32 rounds onto every square foot of a beach within just 10 seconds. Such concentrated and relentless firepower could halt even the most determined assaults, as had been seen when the Canadians had faced similar defenses at Juno Beach, where the overwhelming volume of machine gun fire had halted their advance cold. Yet this deadly array of machine guns became virtually impotent against the approach of a new breed of armored vehicles. Tanks specifically designed to provide covering fire, penetrate fortifications, and eliminate threats with a single devastating shot. On the Italian Gothic line, which spanned across the rugged Apennine Mountains, a German officer named Unteroffizier Bruno Hoffmann, serving with the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, had been holding commanding positions since the fall of 1943. His MG-42s controlled narrow mountain passes near Monte Battaglia, where the terrain funneled Allied forces into deadly kill zones. These natural bottlenecks turned every meter of advance into a brutal, bloody contest, with German defenses delivering devastating volleys of machine gun fire. Even amidst these formidable defenses, the British forces in the mountains had begun deploying their own specialized armored units, vehicles capable of withstanding the intense fire and delivering their own destructive payloads. These tanks and assault vehicles, equipped with powerful demolition charges and reinforced armor, aimed to make the entrenched defenses obsolete. The German paratroopers, elite troops who had transformed from airborne assault units into ground fighters following their victory at Cree, had become masters of defensive warfare. They strategically placed their MG-42s to maximize their soon. They would come to realize that neither concrete bunkers nor earthworks could provide sufficient protection against the relentless onslaught of flying debris and collapsing structures, especially in the face of the enemy's relentless bombardment. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, far across the vast Pacific Ocean, on the island of Okinawa, Japanese military engineers had been meticulously studying the defensive tactics employed by German forces during the war. Drawing inspiration from these insights, they set about constructing even more intricate and formidable fortifications, designed to withstand the fiercest assaults. Colonel Yahara Hiramichi, a key figure among these architects of defense, devised a layered, or defense-in-depth, strategy that made use of the island's natural features, most notably extensive networks of natural caves. These caves were gradually expanded and reinforced into underground strongholds that could serve as secure positions from which Japanese troops could resist the invaders. Within each of these subterranean fortresses, heavy weaponry was carefully positioned. For instance, many of these underground chambers housed Type 92 heavy machine guns, which in many ways were the Japanese equivalent of the notorious German MG-42. These weapons were strategically placed to cover approaches from multiple directions, creating a deadly crossfire that was difficult for attackers to penetrate. The Japanese defenders had gone to great lengths to ensure that these concealed positions remained unseen until the moment when American forces were fully committed to entering the kill zone. Their intelligence gathering had provided them with valuable information about Allied armor capabilities, gleaned from German reports and captured documents, which led them to believe that their deeply buried positions, some carved nearly 30 feet into solid rock, would be almost impervious to any demolition charges or explosive assaults. However, the Japanese forces did not yet fully grasp that the Americans had developed their own specialized weaponry in response. Among these innovations were modified Sherman tanks equipped with Navy marquee flamethrowers capable of projecting a powerful napalm gasoline mixture, reaching as far as 200 yards into cave entrances and crevices, a weapon that could ignite even the most well-fortified subterranean positions. Back at the military base of Lou Hamel, as the morning of June the 6th unfolded, Krauss could hear the intense and increasing sounds of naval bombardment echoing through the air. Shells fired from mighty British cruisers, the HMS Ajax and HMS Argonaut, screamed overhead in rapid succession, most of them dropping behind Krauss's position. Despite the destructive power of these shells, most failed to penetrate the thick concrete of his defenses, which protected his MG-42 machine gun. This gave Krauss a false sense of security, convincing him that the Atlantic Wall, and by extension his stronghold, would hold firm, just as Rommel had assured him it would. Yet a subtle, growing sense of unease was creeping over him as he observed that the preliminary bombardment seemed somewhat lighter and less destructive than expected. It was almost as if the Allies were deliberately sparing their most powerful weapons for the moment of actual attack, prioritizing the capture of the beaches rather than their outright destruction. Close to Krauss, his gun crew, Gerrit Muller, operating the loader position, and Schutz Wagner, responsible for managing the ammunition supply, had been trained to execute a crucial, life-saving task, changing a hot barrel in less than 20 seconds. This skill was vital because the MG-42 was prone to overheating, and failure to change the barrel quickly could create deadly gaps in their defensive fire. Neither Muller nor Wagner suspected that their own position's survival would be measured in mere hours, not days. At precisely 7 hours and 25 minutes, the first wave of British soldiers from the 53rd Infantry Division began their assault on Gold Beach. As this occurred, Krauss opened fire with his MG-42, which performed flawlessly, precisely as designed. He concentrated his fire on the advancing soldiers of the 1st Hampshire Regiment, who were struggling through the surf toward the shore. With disciplined precision, Krauss delivered controlled bursts of between 7 and 10 rounds, each carefully aimed to maximize damage while preventing the weapon from jamming. Already the barrel was beginning to heat up from the continuous firing, but Krauss remained fully focused on his sector, methodically sweeping the beach to cover the approaching troops. Unbeknownst to him, beyond his line of sight, specialized tanks, the Churchill AVRES, were being unloaded from landing craft and moved into position. These tanks, modified with additional armor plating on the front, had been designed specifically to support the assault on Gold Beach. The British had taken valuable lessons from their experience with the German DEP, destruction of enemy positions doctrine, which had shown that standard tanks were vulnerable when directly assaulted on the beach terrain. To counter this, the Churchill AVRES had been fitted with extra armor, especially on their frontal arc, which some reports claim could withstand direct hits from the feared 88mm anti-tank guns. Their true strength, however, in the chaos of battlefield operations, a particular scene unfolded that would forever be etched into the memories of those involved. Under the command of Officer Henrik Knab, a seasoned member of the 325th Infantry Division, soldiers sat in a reserve bunker hidden behind the primary defensive line. Their task was to identify incoming enemy vehicles based on recognition cards, an essential skill designed to provide quick and accurate identification of various armored threats. Knab, like his comrades, had undergone rigorous training, familiarizing himself with the silhouettes and armament configurations of various tanks. However, nothing in his training or in the reference materials could have prepared him for the sight that suddenly appeared before him. When the first of the Churchill assault vehicles, Royal Engineers, AVRES, began to move inland from the beaches, Knab was momentarily stunned. Unlike the familiar images of the 75mm Sherman tanks or the standard Churchill tanks depicted on his recognition cards, these new vehicles had a markedly different appearance. Their guns were stubby, wide-bored, and short, so much so that they seemed almost comical, reminiscent of toys a child might play with, rather than lethal weapons of war. The guns did not resemble the elongated, long-barreled anti-tank cannons favored by the German forces, but instead looked like oversized, unwieldy tubes that lacked precision and grace. The peculiar design of these weapons was intentional. The AVRE's primary armament was a petard mortar, a specialized demolition weapon created for this very purpose. Colonel Blacker, the inventive mind behind the development of the petard mortar, had previously designed a revolutionary spigot mortar system. This design utilized a remarkably powerful spring, capable of absorbing up to 20 tons of recoil energy, to automatically recock the weapon after each shot. This innovation allowed the mortar to fire massive 40-pound demolition charges with impressive accuracy, enough to breach the thick concrete walls of bunkers at ranges of approximately 80 yards. The system was a marvel of engineering, combining brute force with precision, and represented a significant leap in siege warfare technology. The British assault engineers, part of the 79th Armored Division, had undergone exhaustive training at the Specialized Assault Training School located in Suffolk. There, they had constructed mock-up German bunkers to perfect their approach tactics, learning how to coordinate closely with infantry units and standard tanks in complex, synchronized maneuvers. Their goal was to suppress and neutralize the enemy's defensive positions, clearing the way for the AVRES to move into optimal firing positions. This methodical dance of destruction was not only a demonstration of engineering ingenuity, but also a deadly choreography designed to turn the Germans' own defensive doctrine against them by exploiting predictable firing fields to plan covered approaches. Each AVRE was operated by a crew of 6 individuals. The team comprised 5 Royal Engineers, experts in demolition, engineering, and tactical coordination, and a single Royal Armored Corps driver responsible for maneuvering the vehicle. A dedicated demolition non-commissioned officer oversaw the preparation and deployment of the explosive charges. Among the personnel, the most perilous task was assigned to the co-driver, who, by necessity, had to expose his hands and arms to the elements during reloading. Opening the massive weapon, similar in appearance to a gigantic shotgun, he would break open the petard mortar's breech, insert the next 40-pound round, and then close the weapon swiftly, all while under active machine gun fire that threatened to tear through the vehicle's armor. Meanwhile, in a nearby bunker at Widerstannis 36, near Nels Feldwebel Auditor, Sergeant Auditor was commanding another machine gun position. He had reported to his battalion headquarters that his team had fired over 3,000 rounds during the initial hour of the invasion, a testament to the intensity and ferocity of the ongoing battle. His bunker's concrete floor was strewn with spent brass casings, clinking and rolling noisily underfoot as his crew managed the feeding of fresh ammunition belts into the insatiable MG-42 machine gun. The situation took a sharp turn when Sergeant Auditor's attention was drawn to a Churchill tank approaching his position. The tank's hull bore what appeared to be a bundle of logs mounted on the front. This was no ordinary obstacle or camouflage. It was an intentionally placed piece of equipment known as a fascine carrier, an AVRE variant specifically designed to deploy bundles of wood and brushwood across anti-tank ditches to facilitate the crossing of Allied vehicles and troops. Unbeknownst to Auditor and his unit, however, the same tanks that carried these seemingly simple bundles also concealed a more sinister armament, the dreaded petard mortar. The first sign that all was not well came when the approaching Churchill halted at approximately 80 yards from Auditor's bunker, and its stubby gun suddenly elevated, aligning directly with the embrasure, a clear indication that the tank was preparing to fire. A sense of foreboding spread through the defenders as the realization dawned that the tank was one of the most impressive features of the British assault during the D-Day operations was the deployment of the formidable Churchill AVRE tanks, which played a pivotal role in breaching German defenses. I witnessed the moment when a Churchill AVRE was directed to execute a demolition mission, utilizing a specially designed device known as the petard, a type of large explosive-laden charge intended to demolish fortified structures. As the tank moved into position, a small projectile, resembling a diminutive flying dustbin, was launched directly at the house above the front entrance. This seemingly insignificant object, about the length of a man's arm, and with a diameter comparable to a large grapefruit, struck just above the door frame and triggered a stunning collapse of the entire structure. The house, which had stood resiliently against previous attacks, crumbled in a rapid, almost cinematic fashion, falling like a house of cards, sending a cascade of bricks and debris flying into the courtyard with a thunderous crash. The defenders, who had been inside armed with machine guns, anti-tank weapons, and other defensive gear, were suddenly thrown into chaos, spilling out into the open amidst the wreckage. This scene was more than just a visual spectacle. It was a terrifying sight that left an indelible mark on those observing. A cold, clinical account would describe the event as the precise detonation of a demolition charge that dismantled a fortified position, but it failed to convey the raw, visceral terror experienced by the German soldiers. They watched helplessly as their stronghold was annihilated in a single burst of explosive force, shattering their sense of security. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. As rumors spread along the German defensive line, soldiers realized that the British possessed a weapon capable of annihilating reinforced concrete bunkers with a single shot. This realization caused a wave of panic, compelling some machine gun crews manning the MG-42s to abandon their posts rather than face the certainty of death when an AVR, an armored vehicle equipped with the devastating demolition capability, approached their positions. This small flying dustbin, officially designated as the number 1 demolition bomb, was a remarkable piece of military engineering. It was a projectile measuring approximately 636 millimeters in length and with a diameter of about 230 millimeters. Packed inside was a hefty payload, 40 pounds of high explosive, capable of penetrating roughly 2 meters of reinforced concrete. Its design allowed it to enter through embrasures or narrow openings, often inside bunkers, before detonating, turning the interior into a lethal death trap. The blast wave, reflected and amplified by the tightly confined space, produced catastrophic effects, shredding the interior and causing destruction on an overwhelming scale. Compared to previous demolition methods, such as satchel charges used by combat engineers, the AVRE offered distinct advantages. Engineers had to approach enemy positions on foot, often under intense fire, placing explosives manually in dangerous and often nearly suicidal circumstances. The use of satchel charges required close proximity to well-defended positions, making their deployment perilous. In contrast, the AVRE could deliver an equivalent explosive punch from a safe distance, protected by its armored hull. The tank's armor was resilient enough to withstand all but a direct hit from a formidable 88mm artillery piece, providing its crew with a significant margin of safety during demolition operations. By the early hours of D-Day, precisely at 8 o'clock in the morning, the first waves of AVRE tanks were already active along the beaches designated for the British and Canadians. These powerful vehicles supported the initial landings, with the 5th Assault Regiment of the Royal Engineers backing up the 51st Highland Division at Gold Beach. Meanwhile, the 6th Assault Regiment was supporting the 3rd Canadian Division's advance at Juno Beach, and the 42nd Assault Regiment was collaborating with the 3rd British Division at Sword Beach. Each of these regiments deployed dozens of specialized Churchill tanks, each one tailored for specific tasks like breaching enemy fortifications. They systematically targeted and dismantled German strongpoints, fortified bunkers and pillboxes that had initially seemed impregnable. For example, the 26th Assault Squadron, supporting the Canadian effort at Juno Beach, managed to destroy 6 major concrete bunkers within the first 3 hours of the landings. Among these was a notorious bunker commanded by Lieutenant Charlie Avray, which blocked a vital exit route from the beach. The squadron successfully cleared this obstacle, though their efforts were temporarily halted when the tank became stuck in a shell crater and had to be abandoned. Despite this setback, the crew had already demonstrated the jaw-dropping destructive power of the petard mortar, an artillery piece mounted on the Churchill AVRE against German defenses. In a particularly significant engagement at Lou Hamel, where the German MG-42 machine gun had been decimating British troops for hours, causing a bottleneck that threatened to halt the entire western flank of the Gold Beach landing, the AVRE played a crucial role. Company C, part of the 1st Hampshire Regiment. Lieutenant Smith sustained injuries during the fierce fighting, yet the decision was ultimately made that the only way forward was to flank the formidable German defenses from behind. This tactical shift, however, was no simple maneuver. It required precious hours of navigating through the chaos, all while under a relentless barrage of gunfire from the enemy. The situation was dire, and every moment counted as the Allied forces endeavored to outflank the well-fortified positions. The German stronghold at Lowell was particularly intimidating, presenting a daunting obstacle to the advancing troops. Its defenses were built with meticulous precision, featuring a potent 75mm gun housed within a reinforced casemate facing eastward. This emplacement was specifically designed to provide suppressing fire along the beach, effectively preventing any Allied landing or movement from that direction. The casemate was protected by a massive 3.5-meter thick concrete wall on the sea-facing side, a formidable barrier intended to withstand direct hits. Surrounding structures contributed to the defensive network, with multiple MG-42 machine gun positions strategically placed within the nearby buildings, forming an intricate web of interlocking fields of fire. Such a setup rendered any approach by attacking forces almost impossible, turning the battlefield into a deadly killing ground where survival seemed unlikely, as one British soldier later remarked. By mid-afternoon, at around 1500 hours, a crucial breakthrough was achieved when an AVRE, an armored vehicle equipped with a petard mortar, belonging to the 82nd Assault Squadron of the Royal Engineers, finally managed to position itself within range of the target area. Its approach was carefully coordinated and supported by the fire from Sherman tanks belonging to the Westminster Dragoons, whose machine guns and artillery served as a protective cover. The tank driver skillfully maneuvered through the rubble-strewn terrain riddled with craters, carefully avoiding hazards while the vehicle's commander directed nearby infantry involved in suppressive fire. These infantry aimed their small arms at the German positions, creating enough of a distraction to allow the massive Churchill tank to slowly inch into the optimal firing range. The tank commander, Sergeant James Patterson, originally a coal miner from Durham, who had volunteered for service in the Royal Engineers, meticulously positioned his Churchill at approximately 75 yards from the main bunker. He rotated the turret with precision, aligning the stubby petard mortar with the embrasure that had been spewing death for an agonizing 8 hours. Inside that bunker, the German gunner, Krauss, was relentlessly firing desperate bursts at the approaching troops, unaware that his position was about to be annihilated. At this critical moment, the first petard round was launched. It struck the concrete directly above the embrasure with a deafening explosion that reverberated throughout the structure. The force of the blast shattered the reinforced concrete, sending flying chunks of debris like shrapnel across the battlefield. The sudden shock wave stunned everyone inside the bunker, even though it remained intact. Yet the danger was far from over. Without hesitation, Patterson's loader, Sapper Tommy Clark, quickly swung open the mortar's breech to load the next projectile, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the ongoing machine gun fire that cracked against the tank's armor. In a perfect demonstration of timing and precision, the second petard round was fired, piercing the bunker's defenses and detonating within the confined space with catastrophic effect. Weighing 40 pounds of high explosive, the second shell created a destructive overpressure that ruptured eardrums, collapsed lungs, and shattered the reinforced walls from within. The explosion turned the bunker into an echo chamber of devastation, the force killing Krauss and his entire crew instantly. The destruction was so complete that it marked a significant turning point in the battle, crippling one of the key German defenses. Later, at around 1600 hours, the same AVRE fired a third petard round, this time targeting the rear entrance of the main casemate at Lou Hamill's fortified position. This shot successfully silenced the 75mm gun that had inflicted chaos along the beach for most of the day. The blast was so immense that it caused German soldiers positioned nearby to abandon their weapons in panic and retreat into the village. From there, they faced relentless house-to-house combat that continued well into the night, as Allied forces hunted them down and forced them to surrender or be neutralized. While the destruction of the main bunker significantly weakened the German defensive line, rendering the enemy's primary stronghold ineffective, the psychological impact of the attack resonated beyond the immediate battlefield. Word of the devastating blow spread swiftly through the remaining German units, instilling fear and disarray as the survivors began to recognize the collapsing strength of their defenses. The victory, therefore, was not merely tactical, but also a crucial morale boost for the Allied forces, signaling the beginning of the end for the hardened German positions along this critical stretch of the front. During the tense and tumultuous days of the Second World War, a new and formidable type of armored threat emerged that shook the confidence of even the most seasoned defenders. The British, in particular, developed and deployed tanks so powerful that they could obliterate heavily fortified bunkers with a single well-placed shot. These tanks, equipped with advanced weaponry and specialized ammunition, had the startling capability to penetrate concrete and steel defenses that defenders had believed to be almost impervious. As news of these devastating weapons spread, panic began to ripple through the ranks of the German MG-42 crews, who suddenly found their once reliable concrete fortifications transformed from protective barriers into deadly traps. These soldiers had been reassured time and again that their concrete bunkers would shield them from any enemy fire, regardless of the attack's intensity. Yet now the terrifying reality was that these fortifications could be shattered with a single, precise shot from a British tank, rendering their previous assurances utterly void and causing widespread dread. Meanwhile, in Italy, the German forces stationed along the formidable Gothic line received disturbing reports about the Allied invasion in Normandy. Initially met with skepticism, news of the landings grew increasingly alarming as reports detailed the existence of specialized British armored vehicles capable of neutralizing even the most fortified enemy positions. These tanks, known for their ability to demolish strong points that had taken months to construct, seemed almost superhuman in their destructive power. The German military leadership, notably General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, responded by urgently requesting detailed intelligence about these new and seemingly unstoppable weapons. By that point, however, it was clear that the Germans had missed the window to develop effective countermeasures. Their engineers could only advise on tactical adjustments, such as dispersing defensive positions and avoiding concentrated strongpoints, since any attempt to concentrate forces in such areas risked instant annihilation by a single well-aimed shot from an Allied tank. The impact of these technological advances was not confined to the European theater alone. The Italian Social Republic, RSI forces, fighting valiantly alongside their German allies, found their morale further shattered by the reports of the effectiveness of Allied specialized armor. These troops had already witnessed firsthand how Allied armored innovations could quickly dismantle defenses that had been held for months. Particularly memorable was the breakthrough at Cassino, where Churchill's crocodile flamethrower tanks, equipped with massive flamethrowers mounted on armored vehicles, had set ablaze entrenched positions, forcing the defenders to abandon their positions in despair. This fiery assault was terrifyingly effective. It combined the destructive power of flamethrower tanks with specialized armored engineering vehicles, referred to by the troops as blowtorch and corkscrew, creating a hellish scene of destruction that demoralized the defenders and showcased the terrifying potential of Allied armored and flame weapons. Far across the world on the island of Okinawa, Japanese forces had initially dismissed reports of Allied bunker-busting tanks, believing that their own deep cave fortifications hollowed out of solid rock would be immune to any form of destruction or demolition. Their military attaché in Berlin had relayed these reports, which were dismissed as Western propaganda. The Japanese believed that their extensive subterranean defenses, constructed through tunnels and caves, would withstand any attack, no matter how intense. However, by April of 1945, Japanese forces faced the harrowing reality that these assumptions were false. American Sherman tanks, equipped and modified with flamethrowers by the Navy's Combat Burn Support (CBS), systematically moved through the island's terrain, unleashing hell on the Japanese tunnel networks. The flamethrowers poured a mixture of gasoline and other incendiaries, resembling liquid death, through the tunnels, which flowed like a deadly current, enveloping entire cave systems in roaring flames. These chemical agents, carried deep into the subterranean labyrinths, consumed oxygen and reached temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Japanese had positioned their Type 92 and Type 96 machine guns at strategic points, particularly at cave entrances, firing at astonishing rates approaching 500 rounds per minute. These machine guns, carefully concealed, created kill zones that made any advancing American infantry vulnerable and necessitated the deployment of specialized armor to eliminate threats from within the caves. As a result, the United States had formed a dedicated tank battalion, the 713, whose entire complement of vehicles had been transformed into flamethrower tanks at a training depot in Hawaii, Schofield Barracks. The Japanese military commander on Okinawa, Colonel Yahara, had devised a defensive plan based on lessons learned from European battles, especially those involving German defenses. His strategy involved constructing multiple, mutually supporting defensive lines that could withstand attacks even if individual strongpoints were overwhelmed or destroyed. This layered defense aimed to prolong the battle and inflict maximum casualties on the invading forces. Yet Yahara had not fully anticipated the psychological and physical terror wrought by the flamethrower tanks. As these American monsters advanced, many Japanese soldiers faced the battle for Omaha Beach was a brutal and relentless clash, where German defenses employed sophisticated tactics designed to exploit the weaknesses of their opponents. Among these was a psychological strategy that proved so effective it caused even seasoned Japanese soldiers, renowned for their unwavering loyalty and resolve, to abandon their positions, strongholds they had sworn to defend to the very end. This tactic, rooted in fear and confusion, played a crucial role in undermining enemy morale on the battlefield. As D-Day unfolded on the Normandy coast during the afternoon hours, the desperate reports from the front lines began to flood into the German command centers. German officers, overwhelmed and increasingly anxious, relayed disturbing news about the relentless assault of British armored units equipped with unconventional weaponry. These tanks, fitted with short, wide guns, were systematically decimating fortified bunkers, structures that had taken months of meticulous construction to establish. And these structures were now being destroyed with alarming ease. One particularly vivid report involved General Major Wilhelm Richter, commander of the 716th Infantry Division, who personally observed a formidable AVRE, Assault Vehicle Royal Engineers, crushing a Tobruk-style defensive position with a single, precise shot. The small concrete bunker, once a symbol of steadfast German resistance, simply evaporated in a cloud of dust and debris, leaving nothing but rubble behind. In response to this emerging threat, the German High Command swiftly reached out to Rommel's headquarters to alert them of the dangerous new development. However, their efforts were hampered by the fact that the field marshal responsible was still in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday. He had been convinced by weather forecasts that the conditions for an invasion were too poor for an assault, which meant that the German military response was uncoordinated and fragmented at a critical moment. Individual commanders, each facing a weapon they scarcely understood, scrambled to adjust their tactics, often working in isolation rather than in a unified effort. The crews operating the MG-42 machine guns, which had managed to survive the initial assault, were eventually pulled back to secondary defensive positions. Yet these hastily constructed fieldworks offered even less protection against the formidable AVRE units, which could simply drive up to the defenses and unleash their petard mortars at point-blank range. The massive demolition charges carried by these vehicles transformed once solid machine gun nests into craters with terrifying efficiency, often annihilating entire squads in a single blast as the shock wave rippled through the network of trenches. The destructive power of these weapons was such that they could eliminate fortified positions instantly, rendering traditional defensive tactics nearly useless. German military doctrine had long centered around the MG-42 machine gun as the core element of infantry tactics. For years, riflemen had been trained primarily as carriers of ammunition and as barrel changers, supporting the machine gun's devastating firepower. This narrow focus, however, became a critical vulnerability when faced with an enemy fleet equipped with vehicles like the AVRE, capable of demolishing such positions with minimal effort. The concentration of firepower on a single weapon system, once considered a strength, now exposed the Germans to swift and decisive destruction whenever the enemy employed demolition charges to eradicate the MG-42 positions. At the wider sector of Stannis No. 62, where Heinrich Sello had been manning an MG-42 for over 9 hours straight, he later claimed to have fired approximately 12,000 rounds, inflicting more than 1,000 casualties. Despite these figures, military historians tend to view such claims with skepticism attributing them to the fog of war, adrenaline, and trauma experienced during the chaos of battle. Ultimately, it was American forces from the 16th Infantry Regiment who managed to breach the defenses at approximately 8:25 in the morning, not through the use of specialized armor or engineer vehicles, but through sheer numerical superiority and unwavering resolve. Sello himself survived the encounter by abandoning his position when his ammunition was exhausted, a decision that likely saved his life. Decades later, his account of the battle became a source of controversy due to its exaggerated claims of single-handedly halting the American advance. Nonetheless, what remains undeniable is that the German MG-42 positions at WN-62 and other key points along Omaha Beach endured longer than similar positions facing British forces. The difference primarily stemmed from the Americans' refusal to adopt Hobart's innovative funnies, including the AVRES, crocodiles, and other specialized vehicles that proved so effective in neutralizing German defenses elsewhere. In particular, General Omar Bradley's reluctance to deploy most of these specialized armored vehicles, accepting only the DD amphibious tanks, has been widely criticized by military historians. By turning down the opportunity to utilize AVRES and other funnies, Bradley arguably missed a crucial chance to bolster the American assault. This decision contributed to the near disaster that unfolded at Omaha Beach, where the lack of adequate specialized engineering vehicles hampered efforts to clear obstacles and secure the beaches swiftly. Had these vehicles been employed from the outset, it is plausible that the prolonged and bloody stalemate might have been shortened, saving lives and enabling. On the initial day of the invasion, American forces endured a staggering toll, suffering more than 2,000 casualties. A significant portion of these losses occurred at German MG-42 machine gun emplacements, positions that could have been neutralized swiftly and with far less risk through the use of petard mortars, small but powerful explosive devices specifically designed for demolishing fortifications. Unfortunately, the prevailing American military strategy relied heavily on conventional combined arms tactics. This approach involved coordinated efforts among infantry units, artillery support, and standard tanks working in unison to suppress and destroy enemy strongpoints. While such tactics were methodically sound, they inherently required soldiers to mount direct assaults against entrenched defenses, often under heavy fire. In stark contrast, the British forces had been employing a different method, utilizing specialized armor, such as the Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, AVEE, which were equipped with powerful demolition charges, sometimes weighing as much as 40 pounds, that could rapidly demolish enemy positions. The British approach allowed them to effectively clear German defenses without the same level of human risk, leading to far fewer casualties and quicker progress inland. The German High Command found its efforts to counter the AVRE threat severely hampered by a rigid and sometimes inefficient command structure. Compounding their difficulties was the disruption of their communications, disruptions caused by Allied air superiority that dominated the skies and sabotage campaigns carried out by French resistance fighters behind German lines. Many German units did not even receive early warning about the presence and capabilities of these specialized tanks until they were already under attack. This lack of timely intelligence created chaos and panic among German troops, as weapons and vehicles they once considered invulnerable suddenly appeared as lethal traps capable of demolishing concrete defenses with ease. Later reflections by Field Marshal Ger von Rundstedt, commanding all German forces in the Western Theater, underscored the significance of the AVRE's appearance. He acknowledged in his reports that the advent of specialized armor designed to breach concrete fortifications essentially rendered their entire defensive strategy obsolete. Despite this recognition, von Rundstedt also noted that even if the Germans had been aware of these weapons earlier, their limited resources and industrial capacity would have prevented them from developing effective countermeasures or modifying their entrenched defenses accordingly. By the end of the first day, on June 6th, the British 51st Infantry Division had made significant progress, advancing nearly 10 kilometers inland from Gold Beach. Their effort was bolstered by the destruction or capture of numerous German strongpoints, made possible through the effective use of AVRES and other forms of specialized armored vehicles. But at Omaha Beach, American soldiers were still struggling to secure their foothold on the beachhead after suffering catastrophic casualties attempting to assault well-fortified positions. These positions, which could have been eliminated effortlessly by a single petard round, remained a deadly obstacle. The stark differences between the two beaches did not go unnoticed by U.S. military commanders. Within weeks, American forces began actively requesting support from British AVRE units for their subsequent operations against German fortifications. Nevertheless, the limited number of these specialized vehicles meant that, for the duration of the campaign, AVRES remained primarily in the hands of Commonwealth forces rather than being widely available to American troops. The psychological impact of the AVRE, often affectionately and somewhat disparagingly referred to as the flying dustbin, extended far beyond its tangible destructive capability. German soldiers, many of whom had never even encountered an AVRE, began abandoning fortified positions at the mere rumor or sight of these tanks approaching. This fear induced a cascade of retreat and disarray among German defenses, which dramatically undermined the entire concept behind the Atlantic Wall. An extensive system of fortified defenses built on the assumption that concrete bunkers could withstand prolonged assaults and that mobile reserves would be available to launch counterattacks. The once formidable MG-42 machine gun, which had been the backbone of German defensive doctrine since 1942, suddenly appeared almost obsolete. This was because the AVRES could neutralize such weapons by destroying their crews and mounts from beyond their effective range with devastating precision. Such capabilities forced a fundamental reevaluation of German defensive tactics, as the assumptions underpinning their fortified line were rapidly eroding. In the weeks following the D-Day landings, as Allied forces advanced further inland across the rugged terrain of Normandy's Bocage country, AVRES continued to demonstrate their value against well-fortified German positions. Though the dense, heavily wooded landscape often limited their operational effectiveness, many AVRES still played a crucial role. Unfortunately, in the process, a significant number of these specialized vehicles were lost to anti-tank weapons, notably Panzerabwehrkanone, Panzer anti-tank guns, which posed persistent threats in the close quarters of Normandy's Bocage terrain. Throughout the course of the war, Allied forces developed increasingly sophisticated tactics and weaponry to combat the formidable defenses constructed by German and Axis forces. One such innovation was the deployment of specialized tanks known as AVRES, which were designed to quietly and effectively destroy fortified positions from concealed locations. These tanks, armed with powerful weapons that could be fired from hidden positions, posed a significant threat to bunkers, pillboxes, and other fortified structures that once seemed nearly impregnable. The Germans, having learned through bitter experience, recognized that while the frontal armor of these AVRES units was remarkably thick and resistant to direct hits, their sides and rear lacked similar protection. As a result, German military records, particularly the war diary of the 79th Armored Division, indicate that by the end of June of the year 1944, AVRES had successfully neutralized over 400 German defensive bunkers, pillboxes, and reinforced buildings. Each destruction by these specialized tanks not only eliminated the target, but also saved numerous Allied lives that might have been lost in more traditional, direct assaults involving heavy infantry and cavalry charges across open terrain. The effectiveness of these tactics demonstrated how a well-placed, concealed attack could circumvent the heavily fortified front lines and strike at strategic points, thereby shifting the balance of ground combat in favor of the Allies. In response, the German military attempted to adapt their defensive strategies to counteract this new threat. They issued orders to set up machine gun positions, specifically MG-42s, at depth within their defensive lines rather than concentrating firepower in singular, fortified strongpoints. This dispersal aimed to prevent a single well-placed demolition charge from wiping out multiple weapons and to complicate the Allied approach. However, this strategy had the unintended consequence of weakening the overall defensive posture, making individual positions more susceptible to conventional infantry assaults. It created a difficult tactical dilemma, whether to strengthen concentrated defenses or to disperse firepower at the risk of exposing individual units to easier infiltration or attack. Some German commanders resorted to more unconventional tactics, attempting to repurpose captured French tanks as rapidly relocatable mobile pillboxes. These improvised fortifications involved burying the tank's turrets deep into the ground, creating hardened firing positions that could be quickly moved to new locations as the battlefield evolved. Unfortunately, these makeshift defenses proved even more vulnerable than expected, especially to petard mortars, explosive projectiles capable of penetrating the relatively thin armor of these old tanks and detonating internally. The resulting explosions often cause catastrophic damage and significant casualties among the defenders inside these pseudo-fortresses. Across the Italian theater of operations, similar adaptive measures were observed. German forces along the Gothic line progressively shifted away from constructing intricate concrete fortifications in favor of dispersed defensive positions integrated into the natural terrain, such as hills, rocky outcroppings, and existing foliage. This approach offered some advantage, but it also made these defenses more accessible to the highly mobile patrol tactics favored by British and Indian troops. These units excelled at infiltrating enemy lines under cover of darkness, striking from unexpected directions, and exploiting the vulnerability of dispersed positions, thus diminishing the overall effectiveness of static defenses. The forces of the Italian Social Republic, already suffering from the demoralizing impact of Rome's fall and the apparent futility of their cause, found themselves increasingly discouraged by reports of the Allied development of what came to be known colloquially as wonder weapons. Entire battalions chose to surrender rather than face the combined onslaught of AVRES tanks and Churchill crocodile flamethrowers, ferocious devices capable of unleashing streams of fire that devastated fortified positions and inflicted terrifying casualties. These weapons earned the moniker I.O. Tribe Britannis, a nickname reflecting the fierce reputation of the British monsters that wielded them. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Wehrmacht was embroiled in a desperate defensive stand against the Red Army's summer offensives, notably Operation Bagration. German commanders observed with growing alarm that Soviet forces were deploying their own specialized armor modifications, including T-34 tanks, fitted with mine rollers designed to clear obstacle belts, and KV tanks converted into mobile flamethrower units. These developments suggested a disturbing exchange of technological innovations and tactical ideas between the Allies and Soviets, indicating that the technological arms race was extending beyond Western frontiers and into the heart of Soviet and German combat zones. The nightmare scenario, facing a barrage of bunker-busting tanks advancing on multiple fronts, began to materialize by the autumn of the year 1944. German defenses, already stretched thin by relentless Allied and Soviet pressure, were pushed to their breaking points. The rapid and relentless progress of these specialized armored units helped accelerate the crumbling of the Third Reich's formidable defensive network and contributed heavily to the overall collapse of Nazi Germany's war effort. In Tokyo, Japanese military authorities were increasingly alarmed by these developments. Colonel Nishitichi, a high-ranking officer, urgently transmitted reports via telegraph to the imperial headquarters in Tokyo, warning that the traditional tactics of the vulnerability of static defensive positions in warfare, was starkly and catastrophically revealed when American flamethrower-equipped tanks, exemplified by the battalion of Sherman tanks converted for flamethrower use, swept through seemingly impregnable Japanese fortifications during the final stages of the Pacific War. These tanks showcased a brutal new form of assault that rendered even the most meticulously planned defenses utterly ineffective, exposing a fundamental flaw in traditional military thinking. In the years leading up to this devastating realization, the Japanese had dedicated significant effort to studying the formidable success of German defensive strategies on the Eastern Front. The German army, particularly through the use of their iconic MG-42 machine guns, had created defensive positions that inflicted staggering casualties upon Soviet human wave attacks. These positions were characterized by carefully fortified machine gun nests, overlapping fields of fire, and extensive tunnel networks. Defensive systems designed to withstand direct assaults and prolong the battle. The Japanese, impressed by these German tactics, sought to emulate them by constructing elaborate tunnel complexes on Okinawa, one of the last major battlegrounds of the Pacific Theater. Lieutenant General Ushima Mitsuru's 32nd Army built a labyrinthine network of over 60 miles of tunnels carved deep into the limestone bedrock, connecting various defensive strongpoints. These tunnels served multiple purposes. They protected soldiers from aerial and artillery bombardment, allowed for the movement of troops and supplies unseen by the enemy, and enabled defenders to launch surprise attacks. Each position was meticulously arranged to provide overlapping fields of fire, creating a veritable death trap for any invading force. The system was designed to be concealed until the moment of attack, ensuring that the enemy forces would commit heavily before realizing they were walking into a carefully prepared and deadly trap. In theory, such a fortress was impenetrable, an almost invulnerable bastion that could hold out against a numerically superior attacker. Yet the arrival of the American 71st Tank Battalion, with 54 Shermans fitted with flamethrowers, changed everything. These specialized tanks, equipped with powerful jet-like streams of fire, transformed the battlefield by turning what appeared to be secure defensive networks into blazing infernos. The flames coursed through tunnel systems like water, following every passage, every ventilation shaft, and every concealed corridor. What was once a carefully designed network of bunkers and tunnels became a death trap, incinerating entire companies and reducing complex defenses to charred wastelands. This fiery destruction aligned with observations from German military intelligence, which had monitored the Pacific battles through their embassy in Tokyo before Japan's surrender. The Germans confirmed their worst fear, that static, fortified defenses, once thought to be the backbone of effective military strategy, had become obsolete in the face of modern, specialized armor and weaponry. One report explicitly noted that the Americans had refined and perfected the tactics that the British had pioneered during the Normandy invasion, where specialized armor units systematically eliminated fortified positions. This new approach rendered traditional defensive concepts reliant on static fortifications increasingly irrelevant and vulnerable. The impact of this shift was humiliating for the Germans, especially considering their pride in the MG-42 machine gun, which had been the cornerstone of their infantry tactics across multiple theaters, from North Africa to the Arctic Circle. The MG-42, renowned for its high rate of fire and reliability, had symbolized the might of German infantry. However, it was effectively rendered obsolete by a simple yet devastating countermeasure: a mortar that fired what resembled a flying dustbin, an improvised yet highly effective incendiary device that could be directed into tunnel networks and fortified positions. This ignoble end to what many considered the greatest machine gun of the war underscored how even the most iconic symbols of military strength could be rendered useless in the face of adaptive and innovative tactics. Ultimately, the significance of the American AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, in World War II extended far beyond the destruction of bunkers and the casualties inflicted. It fundamentally altered the paradigm of military planning and battlefield strategy, demonstrating conclusively that no defensive position, no matter how heavily fortified or well-armed, was invulnerable to specialized assault vehicles and weapons designed specifically for breaching defenses. This realization prompted a reassessment of fortress tactics worldwide, fostering the development of engineering vehicles and countermeasures aimed at overcoming entrenched positions. The reliance of German military doctrine on the MG-42 as the primary element of their defensive strategy inadvertently created a critical vulnerability. By concentrating firepower in fixed, static positions, they made these targets priority objectives for Allied armor units equipped with specialized offensive capabilities. These vehicles, such as the American M728 Combat Engineer Vehicle or the Soviet IMR series, trace their lineage back to the innovative use of engineering tanks, like the Churchill tanks that famously destroyed German MG-42 nests using improvised flamethrowers and incendiary devices. What once appeared to be a formidable fortress of steel and gunfire was quickly transformed into a vulnerable target, vulnerable to the ingenuity of modern warfare. In the broader context of military history, the employment of specialized armored engineering vehicles, whether used to clear mines, modern military forces continue to study the Normandy campaign as an exemplary lesson in the complexities of specialized warfare, where innovative technologies and tactical flexibility combine to overcome seemingly impregnable defensive positions. This campaign serves as a powerful reminder that, despite the immense human cost paid in blood and sacrifice along the beaches of France and across the Pacific Theater, the lessons learned remain invaluable in shaping contemporary military strategies. Decades after the conflict, veterans of the German 352nd Infantry Division consistently recalled the moment when the appearance of assault vehicles with remote-controlled explosive, AVREs, signaled the collapse of the Atlantic Wall, an imposing defensive network that had been meticulously constructed to withstand any assault. One survivor vividly recalled the shift in morale, stating, "We had been told that our concrete bunkers could endure anything, that our machine guns, like MG-42s, would mow down any attacking force with ease, cutting through the enemies like wheat in a harvest." However, the arrival of these tanks, armed with their peculiar short-barreled guns, changed everything. Suddenly, the solid-looking concrete fortifications seemed fragile, almost paper-thin, and the explosions caused by the AVRES turned these defenses into crumbling ruins in moments. This psychological blow shattered the confidence that had been painstakingly built over years of fortification, and in doing so, they delivered perhaps the greatest blow to the German defenders' will to resist, arguably surpassing the physical destruction inflicted. Similarly, Italian soldiers fighting alongside German units along the Gothic Line experienced a visceral and dramatic breakdown when faced with the advanced Allied armored vehicles, particularly the Churchill tanks, that they mockingly dubbed Illustrator, meaning destroyer in their language. Many units faced with these monstrous machines demolishing fortified positions that had taken months to construct simply dissolved or melted away rather than engage in futile resistance. The accounts preserved in Italian military archives describe the overwhelming sense of demoralization that set in when soldiers realized that no amount of fortification could prevent these tanks from breaching defenses. The terrifying knowledge that death could come at any moment from a weapon they could notly fight. These feelings of helplessness precipitated mass surrenders, hastening the collapse of Axis forces across Italy and accelerating the downfall of their defensive efforts. On the other side of the world, Japanese forces stationed on Okinawa faced their own psychological upheaval, despite their cultural emphasis on the well-known tenets of death before dishonor. When confronted with American flamethrower tanks, many soldiers experienced a breakdown in resolve that proved unthinkable before the war. Numerous accounts describe how troops abandoned their positions, sometimes against direct orders, rather than face the terrifying prospect of being burned alive. These weapons, which combined the destructive power of flamethrowers with armored tanks, exemplified a level of horror that deeply challenged Bushido, the code of honor that prioritized facing death bravely. The terror these weapons instilled was such that soldiers would rather desert than confront their deadly capacity, breaking a cultural taboo and illustrating the profound psychological impact these innovations wielded. The American Chemical Warfare Service documented the immediate effects of these flamethrower tanks on enemy morale, noting that their mere presence frequently prompted surrender or retreat even before direct engagement. One officer observed that the psychological impact of these weapons was worth 10 times the actual casualties inflicted because the fear they inspired was so profound. Entire sectors of defensive positions would collapse just upon rumors of approaching flamethrowing tanks, demonstrating the immense power of psychological warfare combined with technological superiority. The evolution of armored and infantry weapons throughout World War II illustrates a broader narrative. The transition from reliance on traditional machine guns like the MG-42, whose dominance once seemed unassailable, to their obsolescence in the face of increasingly specialized and destructive armor. The MG-42, with its revolutionary roller lock mechanism and unprecedented rate of fire, was initially heralded as the ultimate infantry weapon. When introduced, it symbolized the pinnacle of German war-making capability, capable of laying down a relentless hail of bullets that could devastate infantry formations. However, as the war progressed, it became clear that technological innovation, such as the development of armored vehicles like the AVRES and flamethrower tanks, began to render such weapons less effective, prompting a relentless cycle of countermeasures and adaptations. This ongoing technological arms race in World War II epitomizes a broader pattern where each side's innovations prompted responses and counter-responses, creating an accelerating spiral of development and deployment. The Allies' capacity for industrial production and rapid technological advancement ultimately placed them at an advantage in this race, allowing them to develop and field specialized solutions that outpaced German innovations. The progression from the MG-42's dominance to the deployment of specialized armor and destructive weapons underscores the importance of technological flexibility and innovation in modern warfare, illustrating how the battlefield's landscape continually evolved through this relentless pursuit of superiority. In conclusion, the Normandy campaign and subsequent battles vividly exemplify how technological innovation and tactical adaptation can decisively influence the course of warfare. The psychological impact of weapons such as Avro. In the year 1942, a remarkable engineering marvel emerged on the battlefield, capable of single-handedly commanding and dismantling enormous stretches of enemy defenses with astonishing efficiency. This formidable vehicle, equipped with specialized tools and weaponry, seemed almost invincible, projecting the image of a robotic powerhouse moving purposefully across the war-torn landscape. Its offensive capabilities and tactical flexibility made it a critical asset during the early years of the conflict, earning a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of German defenders. However, by the year 1944, this seemingly unstoppable force had been rendered largely ineffective, thwarted by a surprisingly simple weapon that looked almost like a relic from medieval times, a spring-powered spigot mortar. This seemingly primitive device, which used a basic mechanical spring and a simple firing mechanism, proved capable of neutralizing the advanced engineering of the AVRE, highlighting how even the most sophisticated military equipment can quickly become vulnerable in the face of ingenuity and simplicity. The rapid obsolescence of this formidable vehicle underscored a fundamental lesson in warfare. No matter how advanced a weapons system may be, it remains susceptible to novel countermeasures that exploit its weaknesses. During the campaign in Normandy, the British 79th Armored Division's after-action reports chronicled the destruction of approximately 342 major German fortifications within the first month of their operations. Each of these demolitions was not merely a tactical victory. It often translated into saving dozens, if not hundreds, of Allied lives, by eliminating the threat of fortified positions that could inflict heavy casualties. These successes formed a grim but necessary calculus that justified the considerable resources and effort poured into developing and deploying these specialized vehicles, despite the intense resistance and desperation of German commanders, who struggled to adapt their tactics swiftly enough to counter the evolving threat. The driving force behind these innovative vehicles was Major General Percy Hobart, a British officer whose unconventional approach to military engineering initially met with skepticism and even disdain from the traditional military establishment. His ideas, once dismissed as radical, were ultimately vindicated by the tangible successes of his funnies, a nickname given to these specialized vehicles that were designed specifically for assault and demolition tasks. Hobart consistently credited his crews, the courageous men operating these unusual machines, with the real credit for their battlefield effectiveness, emphasizing that it was the skill, bravery, and ingenuity of the personnel, rather than any mere technological novelty, that led to victory. Among the men who became legends through their daring exploits in these vehicles were individuals like Sergeant Bill Hawkins of the 26th Assault Squadron, who famously destroyed 7 German bunkers on D-Day. Hawkins's Churchill tank-mounted AVRE was instrumental in clearing a path for advancing infantry and armor, until it was ultimately knocked out by an 88mm anti-tank gun. Another hero was Lieutenant James Morrison of the 82nd Assault Squadron, whose quick thinking and aggressive tactics enabled him to demolish the main stronghold at Hillman, a massive, heavily fortified complex that had withstood hours of relentless naval bombardment, yet ultimately fell to the destructive power of the AVRE. These brave men, predominantly Royal Engineers, volunteering for what was arguably one of the most perilous roles in the entire invasion, understood that their survival depended entirely on their ability to act swiftly and decisively. They knew that success required getting close enough to their targets to employ their petard mortars, powerful demolition devices, before German anti-tank weapons could respond effectively. It was a deadly game of seconds, where hesitation could mean certain death, and only confident, aggressive action could ensure the destruction of enemy defenses and the safety of their comrades. German military doctrine, shaped and refined through years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front, had relied heavily on the formidable MG-42 machine gun positions, which had massacred Soviet infantry in their thousands. This doctrine, emphasizing entrenched and heavily fortified positions, proved catastrophically inadequate against the innovative tactics and specialized assault vehicles developed by the Allies. The German defenses, so carefully crafted to withstand traditional armored assaults, were no match for vehicles like the Churchill AVRE, which could bypass or destroy entrenched bunkers and fortified positions with ease. This failure vividly demonstrated the peril of preparing for past conflicts rather than anticipating future innovations that would render existing defenses obsolete. The extensive Atlantic Wall, Hitler's formidable Atlantic coastline defense system, had consumed vast resources and served as a powerful propaganda symbol of impregnable strength. Yet it proved to be utterly vulnerable and crumbled within a single day when faced with weapons and tactics that it had not been designed to resist. The specialized vehicles and explosive devices employed by the Allies effectively turned the supposedly impregnable defenses into death traps for the defenders. This shattering defeat exposed the fundamental flaw in relying solely on fixed fortifications, no matter how elaborate or strongly built, in an era increasingly defined by mobile, adaptable, and technologically advanced warfare. Post-war analyses conducted by the German General Staff, while many officers were held in Allied captivity, identified the critical failure to foresee and counter the development of these assault vehicles as a key factor in their defeat. Throughout the course of the Cold War and into the modern era, military engineering doctrine has been profoundly shaped by relentless technological advancements and the evolving nature of combat. As nations sought to gain strategic advantage on the battlefield, each major military power invested heavily in developing specialized vehicles designed explicitly to overcome heavily fortified enemy positions. These developments range from the Soviet Union's IMR engineer vehicles, purpose-built for breaching fortifications and clearing obstacles, to Israel's Puma combat engineering vehicle, which exemplifies modern battlefield engineering capabilities. All these vehicles and systems embody a wealth of lessons learned through decades of warfare, incorporating insights gained from past conflicts to improve effectiveness and survivability when confronting entrenched defenses. The foundational principles behind modern combat engineering can be traced back to innovations like the Churchill tank's adaptation for demolition tasks, specifically the deployment of large-scale explosive charges from protected platforms. This approach was revolutionary at the time, enabling engineers and combat units to destroy formidable bunkers and fortified structures from a safe distance. Over the years, technological evolution has seen these core ideas develop from simple spigot mortar systems embedded into tanks to sophisticated missile delivery platforms capable of precise, destructive strikes. Despite these advancements, the core human stories, those of individual soldiers, engineers, and commanders, remain the most compelling aspect of this history. Their bravery, ingenuity, and desperation are captured vividly in memoirs, unit histories, and interview transcripts, offering a visceral insight into how technological innovations have transformed the nature of war. One can imagine German machine gunners who, in their final moments, fired desperately at advancing Allied forces, unable to halt their relentless progress. Their efforts stand as poignant testament to the human cost of warfare. Similarly, British engineers of that era risked their lives to operate petard mortars, small yet potent explosive devices, close enough to enemy bunkers to destroy them, demonstrating extraordinary bravery and ingenuity in the face of danger. In the Pacific Theater, Japanese soldiers faced an agonizing dilemma: to burn alive rather than abandon positions they had sworn to defend to the bitter end. Such stories underscore the personal experiences behind the machinery of war, stories that reveal how individual courage and sacrifice were intertwined with technological progress. These first-hand accounts, preserved through memoirs and official histories, provide an impactful understanding of how innovations, like the introduction of a simple spigot mortar into a Churchill tank, could dramatically alter battlefield dynamics. What once might have been considered safe positions could quickly become death traps with the addition of such simple yet effective weapons. As warfare evolved, so did the weapon systems themselves. For example, the German MG-42 machine gun, which proved to be one of the most effective and enduring weapons of World War II, remained influential long after the conflict ended. Its design was so fundamentally sound that it directly inspired subsequent machine guns, including the American M60 and the Belgian FNMAG. The MG-42's legacy is a testament to the robustness of its engineering, but it also offers a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-reliance on a single tactical or technological solution. The Germans placed immense faith in the MG-42's capacity to dominate the battlefield, anchoring their defensive doctrine around fixed positions that maximize its firing rate and lethality. These strongholds, meticulously constructed to exploit the weapon's strengths, epitomized a conventional approach to warfare: firepower and positional advantage. However, this reliance created a glaring vulnerability. When agile engineers managed to infiltrate, or when Allied forces employed demolition charges to destroy these fixed defenses, the entire strategy could collapse swiftly. The collision between traditional military thinking, based on static firepower, and emerging innovative tactics was vividly exemplified in this context. Within the broader narrative of World War II, the clash between the classic reliance on machine guns like the MG-42 and innovations like the Assault Vehicle Royal Engineers, AVRE, armored vehicles symbolized a fundamental shift. The AVRE, equipped with specialized demolition equipment, represented a departure from reliance solely on firepower to neutralize enemy defenses. It embodied an innovative approach designed to overcome stationary fortifications, an approach that challenged and ultimately undermined the effectiveness of the traditional doctrine. This pattern of technological innovation challenging established tactics would recur throughout the war, underscoring the constant tension between conventional military thinking and adaptive, technology-driven strategies. Despite the German military's reputation for tactical ingenuity and innovation, they proved surprisingly conservative in their defensive doctrine, often clinging to established concepts even as clear evidence of their obsolescence accumulated. During the final years of the war, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine and advanced deep into the heart of Germany, the Germans attempted to adapt. Their last-ditch defensive operations showed some lessons had been learned from earlier campaigns like Normandy. For example, MG-42 positions were now more dispersed and concealed, rather than concentrated in obvious bunkers that could be swiftly targeted and destroyed. These modifications reflected a recognition of the vulnerabilities inherent in static defenses designed around traditional firepower. However, by that late stage in the conflict, it was largely too little, too late. The industrial and technological might of the Allied powers had produced an enormous array of specialized vehicles. The final units to surrender in May of 1945 included crews operating the formidable MG-42 machine guns, an iconic weapon that had, over the course of the war, witnessed a remarkable journey. These soldiers had fought through the entire spectrum of conflict, from the early triumphant campaigns of 1940 to the catastrophic defeats of 1945, enduring the relentless grind of battle and witnessing firsthand the dramatic evolution of warfare itself. For these men, their weapon had once symbolized the overwhelming firepower and tactical superiority of the German Wehrmacht, dominating battlefields across Europe and Africa. Yet by the war's end, this same machine gun had become a symbol of obsolescence, a relic of a bygone era in military technology, as the nature of combat had shifted dramatically and irreversibly. The witnesses to this transformation saw their once glorious weapons and tactics rendered ineffective as warfare moved beyond the realm of brute firepower and entrenched defensive positions. It was a period marked by profound technological and strategic upheavals, where innovations in assault methods, armor, and mobility redefined the battlefield. The surrender of these last German units encapsulated the end of an era when the once imposing MG-42, which had been feared across the continent, was no longer able to withstand the relentless march of modern adaptive warfare. Meanwhile, the Japanese surrender in August of the same year brought an abrupt halt to the Pacific conflict, following the devastating atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. These unprecedented acts of war effectively prevented the planned invasion of the Japanese homeland, an operation that, if carried out, would have resulted in unparalleled destruction and suffering. In preparation for such an invasion, huge quantities of specialized military equipment had been crafted, including flamethrower tanks and other specialized armored vehicles designed to neutralize entrenched defenses. These vehicles were envisioned to turn what would have been an extraordinarily brutal campaign into an even greater humanitarian catastrophe, with the potential for mass casualties among civilians and soldiers alike. The lessons learned from the brutal fighting on Okinawa were integral to this planning. During that campaign, flamethrower tanks had been used with devastating effect against elaborate cave and tunnel defenses, reducing what were thought to be nearly impregnable fortresses to smoldering ruins. This brutal and effective method of assault was expected to be employed on a much larger scale in the planned invasion of Japan, leading some military analysts to estimate that specialized armored vehicles, designed specifically for bunker busting and tunnel destruction, would have been responsible for the majority of Japanese casualties during that hypothetical campaign. It was a testament to the destructive power of innovation when applied to the battlefield. A comparative analysis of the defensive failures of German, Japanese, and Italian forces during the war reveals recurring patterns that continue to inform modern military strategy. Common threads include overconfidence in fixed fortifications, believing that concrete bunkers and entrenched positions could withstand the most advanced assault technology available, along with an inability to adapt swiftly to new threats. When confronted with innovative attacking methods, such as specialized armor or new forms of mobile warfare, these defenses often crumbled, and the psychological impact of such collapses was profound. Soldiers and commanders, once convinced of the invulnerability of their positions, faced the crushing realization that their defenses were largely ineffective against modern, adaptive tactics and weaponry. The lessons from these failures remain relevant to military strategists today, emphasizing the importance of flexibility and continuous innovation. The tragic fate of MG-42 crews trapped in their bunkers at Normandy, Japanese machine gunners ignited within their caves at Okinawa, and Italian soldiers fleeing their positions along the Gothic Line all shared a common, fundamental misconception. They believed, erroneously, that their defensive firepower and fortifications alone could shield them from the relentless, evolving assault technology that modern warfare demanded. This mistaken confidence in static defenses, no matter how formidable they appeared, ultimately led to their downfall when faced with new, more adaptive means of attack. Today, as armed forces around the world confront emerging threats, ranging from swarms of drones and precision-guided munitions to cyber warfare and advanced electronic countermeasures, the story of how the Flying Dustbin, the first armored vehicle equipped with a specialized assault role, defeated the formidable MG-42 remains profoundly instructive. It reminds us that no defensive system, regardless of its strength or seeming invulnerability, is immune to the relentless march of technological progress. Innovation, flexibility, and the ability to adapt swiftly to new forms of warfare are essential for survival and success on today's complex battlefields. The evolution of military technology is ongoing, and future conflicts will almost certainly be won by those who develop the modern equivalent of the Allied engineer vehicle Royal Engineers, perhaps a new revolutionary tool capable of overcoming even the most entrenched defenses. Just as the first Churchill AVRE marked a turning point in assault tactics by using innovative engineering solutions to destroy MG-42 nests and breach fortified positions, future breakthroughs will determine the outcome of modern conflicts. The concrete bunkers of Normandy, now iconic memorial,